Hey, it's time for another Q&A. I did one 2 weeks ago, and I actually loved doing it. And I was hoping that people had more questions about serverless, Ymir, and other topics in general. And I got some more questions, so I'm really happy to be able to do another Q&A with all of you today. So I'm just gonna jump right into the first question. It's from Russell. His question is, what's the most cost-effective way to run serverless PHP with GD support? If you're not familiar with GD support, it's it's a library for image manipulation. It's one of the two libraries that WordPress supports. There's GD and Imagic, and with Ymir, Imagic is bundled directly into the layer, the runtime that I build. But if you're not looking to use uh, Ymir or the Ymir runtime, Bref is the other really popular runtime for PHP. And with Bref, what you can do is they have a secondary repository called Bref extensions, and in them you can choose different libraries that you want to add to um, your PHP runtime. So the way it works with Lambda is that you have layers. So it's kind of like they build a Docker image, but you can choose what parts of the Docker image. So there's like a base image, and then you can add up to 5 layers. So what you could do is just add the GD layer to your Bref layer, and you'd have Bref PHP, whichever versions you want. They support from, I believe, 7.2 or maybe just 7.3 to PHP 8, and then you'd be good to go. So it's very cost effective. It costs you zero, and so it's a very effective way to use GD with PHP. The next question that I got was from Chris, and Chris was asking, how do resource costs scale for a typical WordPress site, linearly, logarithmically, etc. Um, Cost estimation is probably my least favorite part of serverless. It's great that it's pay per use. The problem is that there's so many variables to the pay per use that it's really hard to do a general cost prediction. In fact, one thing I'd like in the long term is to have better metrics for all the resource costs. In general, your costs are going to be linear because most of the services that you will use for serverless PHP are are pay per use. So the more traffic you get, the more it's going to cost. So CloudFront's pay per use, so you pay for the traffic. If you have no traffic, you pay zero. Lambda, it's pay per use as well. So if you get no traffic, you pay zero. Um, and then all the data transfer fees as well. But there are a couple of things that you pay um, just to keep online. So the two of them are RDS, so your database. So your database is always, it's one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive part of hosting on AWS, and you can't pay per use. So it's on, and you have to kind of predetermine how big it's going to be beforehand. Um, so that part's always like a bit of a how can I say, it's a bit of a gateway, because if you're just running, when I wrote about cost estimation for a blog, if you, even the smallest RDS instance comes down to $15 a month, so that's quite a bit. So your cost of entry is quite large because of that. But the good news is that you can reuse a lot of these fixed cost resources. So the other one, I kind of jumped, I kind of stay with RDS, but the other one is if you're using Redis, so Elasticache is also a fixed cost. resource. But the good news with both of these resources is that they can be reused across your different WordPress sites. So you can have one RDS instance and use it across for dozens of sites. So your $13 a month for RDS comes down to $1 a month if you have 13 sites. And it's the same thing with Elasticache, even more so because Elasticache just like a week ago, I tweeted about the load testing I did for WooCommerce, and me and Julian had 3,000 customers live checking out a WooCommerce site. So this is like pure brute force PHP, and we just had a T3 micro Redis instance. It didn't really blink. So technically speaking, you could have one Redis instance that costs $13 a month, and you could use it across really unlimited sites. It really depends, I think, more on like how much space it's going to use. I don't remember offhand what's the cost, like how much space it takes, but really that's really where it's gonna that's really like you're there's nothing in WordPress that's gonna really tax your Redis instance, as far as I can tell. So that was kind of a long way of answering the question. It's definitely not logarithmically. It's pretty linear. So except for your fixed cost that you can break down per site, most of the your cost scale will scale with traffic. So it's pretty easy once you have a couple of historical data, like 2-3 months of cost information. You can probably figure out what your analytics. Okay, we received 1,000 visitors, like 10,000 visitors. It cost us $20. It comes down to uh, 50 cents per 1,000 visitors, and then you can kind of scale. You can see that your costs are going to scale with that. Um, so that's kind of the way I've been doing it for now, because it's just there's just too many variables. Because, like I said, some of it, like we've talked about the Lambda stuff, but some of it is hard to predict because if you have a lot of media, your data transfer costs, your CloudFront costs are not going to be the same as if you have just a site with mostly text, no videos and things like that. So it's really on a per site basis that you want to do your cost estimate. So the next question after that is from Marius. And Marius is asking, are there any specific requirements for a theme or plugin to be compatible with an Ymir powered environment out of the box? So I've done a lot of work to ensure that Ymir is really transparent. Um, where, but it's hard because there's so many teams and plugins, and they're all coded a bit differently. So a lot of the work that I did behind the scenes is to make sure that WordPress, if you use WordPress functions, you will never know that you don't have a server. So far that's worked. I haven't run into too many issues with that. But if a plugin is kind of hard coding like file open and just putting just the relative pat, or not using WordPress file pat functions, then you might run into issues with that. And the way I've kind of worked around it is I can let you, when you build your kind of deployment, Ymir, when Ymir deploys, it's going to package your entire WordPress install, and it's going to move files. Normally, files that cause problems are like CSS files, S3 files, because those ones I'd move out. They don't want it. You don't want them on Lambda. You just want them on S3, and I'm trying to keep the Lambda size image small. So they get moved out, and this is what really most of the plugin compatibility issues have been so far, is because they look for the file on the local file system because they're not using WordPress functions, and they don't find it, and it kind of causes weird behavior because of that. But the simple way around that, and I've had a few guys that I've written for Sage, for Beaver Builder, is that you can just include specific folders or files, or you can include the entire plugin. I try to not do that just to save space. But if you just include the entire plugin, it's going to package all the files in the plugin and put them on Lambda as well. So if they try to like open those files or do something with those files, um, they'll find them, even though that there's a copy on them on S3, and the one that they're going to use, the one that Ymir is going to serve as the one on S3, they'll still find the file there to just see like, does the directory exist, things like that. So it's kind of the workaround around that. But so far it's worked actually surprisingly well. I mean, hell, Beaver Builder works. Like Beaver Builder, there was a small issue that I needed to fix because it puts files in the upload directory, and I didn't really account for that. And a lot of plugins are going to do that. But outside of that, it kind of like worked outside the box. Like there wasn't a lot of changes to do because, like I said, it's just I try to really do like a compatibility layer at the WordPress level. So if you're a good plugin and you're using WordPress functions, you won't even know. You shouldn't even be aware that you're not on the server, and that's really useful. But again, it'll vary from plugin and teams. If if it's a lower quality, uses less WordPress stuff team, then it might run into issues that are more specific. But that's part of the challenge, unfortunately, with using a platform like that, is to you have to kind of figure out what's working and what's not. The last question I got was from Jonathan again. He said, "Okay, on a serious note, what does this weekly team schedule you seem to be on look like, and why are you doing it?" So what he's talking about is I'm kind of like on a 2 week cycle that I do 1 week of product development and another week of marketing. I work on writing articles, documentation, tweeting stuff, trying stuff, sharing stuff, just to get awareness out. And so why am I? So the to answer that question, the first part is I blatantly copied that from John from Banner Bear. I don't want to try to pronounce his last name because I feel I'm going to mispronounce it. But um, John from Banner Bear wrote this post in January when I was kind of struggling to figure out how I wanted to do how was I going to market this thing. And he had this post how he got to 10,000 MRR. But what struck with me was he had this 2 week cycle where 1 week he did product development, and 1 week he did marketing. And I thought it was really interesting because it's really hard to balance the two. You need both. I want to work on the product, but I also want to market. And we're developers. We're gonna if we don't structure ourselves, we'll probably just spend all of our time just doing product development. But also, what I found heartening was that he just figured out a way that felt right for him, and a lot of what he did felt right for me. Um, the challenge with Emir marketing wise is that it's very similar to depending on how long you've been following me, it's very similar to the struggles I had when I started teaching object oriented programming. There's just no channel for this. I'm not gonna. I could spend hundreds of dollars on Facebook ads, but I wouldn't get the people necessarily interested. There's no there's no watering. There's no really big watering hole outside the advanced WordPress group and some Reddit and Twitter where I can just share and do this stuff. So or I can just like target people with ads, and I just didn't want to do that. It didn't really feel authentic, and so I just felt I needed to do a similar playbook as what I did with the book, which is just write a lot of content, um, share, just be active, be positive with people, and and I think awareness is going to grow over time. I I was talking with a friend yesterday, and like all this load testing work that I've done, like I struggle a bit with doubt whether like this can take off in WordPress or not. But the more I do serious testing, the more I see that like this isn't this doesn't feel like this doesn't feel like a thing that's useless. It solves very specific needs. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. I understand that. There's something to be said about deploying and not having access to your stuff and not being able to edit files and the whole process. But I mean, if you're in the JS world, it's kind of it's kind of like the same thing. If you deploy the Netlify, you can't SFTP to Netlify and fix your stuff. You just redeploy it and fix your thing. So I think that as more people do more JS things, get more exposure with this, they'll feel a bit more comfortable with this idea of how it works. Um, but for but that's kind of the idea. I'm kind of like diverging. I'm really bad at that. But just to go back a bit to why am I doing it is because I need to take the long game, and he was thinking a long game. He was like, this is going to take however long it's going to take. I think for him, I mean, now he's growing really crazy, but I think he had a year of like trying stuff and he made zero money, and then he had a year where it was making very little money, and then it kind of took off. I'm not necessarily expecting the same thing for me, but I like that he had a long game in mind, because that's how I feel about this. I don't secretly inside you always want your thing to be like an overnight success, but in reality it's not. So I need a strategy. I needed somebody that was just a bit further ahead of me. Like there's something to be said. A lot of people that do product stuff will tell you like don't follow people that are like miles away from you, because their advice is not super relevant. He's pretty close. Like he's a year ahead, and I just felt it was really relevant to what I was doing, and it just had a good cycle to it. Like I could like work on stuff for a week, talk about it, work on some more stuff. I think if features take more than a week, it's always a bit more challenging. But it gave structure. It gave structure. It gave a way to like have a long game with marketing this, because I think it's a long game. It's either it won't work and I'll figure it out in the long game, or it's going to work and it's going to take a while. Um, but that's always like how I've seen it. So it was just really interesting to see somebody like that felt they were passionate about something, that it was something of value, uh, and they would get there eventually. It just required a long term strategy, and to me that felt like a good strategy. Uh, so that's kind of why I did it. Kind of long story, but I think it's important when it's hard for me. It's hard for developers with marketing. It's not the easiest thing, and I like learning about stuff. I like being multidisciplinary, but I also want to do things my own way, which doesn't always work. I always get a bit depressed. Like I'm friends with Justin Jackson, which this is what the T-shirt says, this community, and he's always like, if there's no market pulling you, it's a waste. It's not. He doesn't say it's a waste of time, uh, you should have the market pull. And I'm not doing something where there's market pull. I'm thinking more. I think there will be a market here. It's just not there yet. So I'm probably too early, or whatnot. But it's working really well with Laravel. So I think it would work well with the rest of the PHP community. So I'm thinking there's going to be something there eventually. So that's kind of why I'm like really passionate about it and just want to keep at it. So yeah, that was a bit of a long answer, but hopefully it was useful. And that was the last question I got. So thank you so much for asking questions. I'm really kind of excited that I got more questions this time than the first time. I hope that continues, because they're fun to do. I might try to make it a bit more open ended. Like you don't necessarily have to ask serverless questions. Maybe you can ask me programming questions or whatnot. And if that's something that interests you, please let me know on Twitter or via somewhere else. Like if you're on Discord, you can ask me on Discord. But yeah, so thank you.